with the amount of scams that are going on, and where are the bad guys getting the information? Is this a source where they're getting that information? I mean, I don't know. But these are some speculations that I can make on why the FBI may have made that decision ultimately.
I'm Cristina Janney with the Hays Post and Eagle Radio, and I'm speaking with Darin Myers, Ellis County Manager, and Emergency Communications Director Jeff Ridgway about the new communication system on this episode of the Hays Post podcast.
I know there's a lot of stuff going around the community about how much it actually costed. There were several pieces to the project that when we actually started talking about the upgrades to the communications system, the number that was out there exponentially increased. The cost to the county, when you look at just the encryption piece, and I'm talking about adding the certain type of encryption over the radio channel, the total cost was right about, I don't know the exact dollar amount off the top of my head, but it was $174,000 and some odd dollars. And then we had a $100,000 grant from the LSSC, which is I don't remember, the local security and safety equipment grant, I believe was what it was called, from the governor's office. So essentially for the Ellis County residents, we had money set aside that we were going to do this in the future anyway. So it was about between $74,000 and $75,000. And then with that, we paid, because we had to replace some equipment. We bought a key loader, some other pieces of equipment as part of the purchase. It wasn't actually part of the program. So I guess what I'm trying to say is about $75,000 is what it costed it was 519 radios that had to be touched. And part of that was they came in and they touched every single portable radio and every single mobile radio and every single agency. So Hays, Ellis, Victoria, Fort Hays State, they hooked up computers to them to realign them and to configure them to make sure that they were programmed correctly. And then they upgraded all the state templates in there to make sure that all the state radio templates throughout the entire state of Kansas, when we talk about mutual aid or large incidents and stuff, that those were all in there. And then we did some reprogramming of local radio channels. And then the final piece was some changes in the dispatch center and then adding all the encryption into it. So it was a fairly large project. It took... we tried to get all 519 radios done in 1 week from that Monday through Friday. There were some nights we were working until 2 or 3 in the morning trying to get them done. But for the most part, I would say after that Friday, about 98% of everything was done throughout that week.
So for this changeover, was there some federal COVID money that was involved in this?
Nope, it was just the $100,000 grant that we wrote last, I believe, October to the state of Kansas that we got the $100,000 grant from. If that was from COVID money that the state allocated, I'm not sure, but it was the grant acronym is LSSE from the state.
So what does this do now that you have this new system? I know that it affected the ability for lay people to hear scanner traffic.
So from a scanner side, we did enact on most of our frequencies, all but one, an AES level of encryption, which part of that was mandated on us from the Federal Bureau of Investigation because of criminal justice information standards that got implemented late 2022, and they've kind of been delayed on the enforcement of that, if you will. And as we're getting into, we do get audited by the FBI and the KBI every so many years. And as we're going through the audit cycle, it's one of the things that we were addressing and making sure that we're in compliance with that new standard that came out in 2022. And so that encryption was kind of pushed on us. And from our perspective of being able to simplify for our first responders as they're going to scenes and as they're interacting with their calls that they're going to, there's one model that would permit where one channel is encrypted and one channel is not encrypted, and the first responders would have to switch back and forth depending on what type of information they're talking to with the dispatchers or what information they're needing from dispatchers. And while that model functions to some degree, it's not as convenient for those first responders when seconds matter and they don't have a lot of time to analyze, is this stuff that should be protected, not protected? So from a convenience perspective and just making it simpler for our first responders, the decision was pretty easy from my perspective of we're just going to encrypt it all, where they don't have to make that infield decision. And it just makes the job for our first responders that much easier. And so that's why we elected to do this full encryption across the board. And further on that, we actually had to separate, and some, like in the years past, we've been able to provide firefighters and EMS personnel with access to our law enforcement channel. But we've had to sever that into where the feds have said, nope, that's not acceptable. We have to keep that separate. And so we've changed that configuration. So not only is the public not seeing some of that or not hearing some of that information, actually some of our first responders are not getting the same level of information that they've had in the past because of the standards that's been pushed on us, again, primarily from the FBI. And so that's kind of the biggest impact is what the public sees is that inability to scan most of our channels. Now, one channel we did create, rather we renamed an old channel, and we're now calling it our weather operations channel. And that one is still a open air channel. And the intention of that channel is when we have severe weather coming in our community and we send out our weather watchers and that this is a channel that they're going to operate those weather operations on, and that our community can hear that, because we know that's very important information. That is a safety information that's very vital to our community. And so we wanted to make sure we when we can release it and we don't have a concern of there being that restricted information being shared, then let's find a way to make that open.
So, Jeff, what was the impetus for the FBI to put down this mandate that said we need to make this so that the public can't hear it?
I can only speculate. I don't know this complete backstory of why they made that route, but I'm guessing we've always had a kind of a standard where certain criminal justice information is not supposed to be shared over open radio. They've changed that encryption standard to some degree, and they've also come down a little bit tighter on what is considered criminal justice information or what's considered personal identifying information, which not only in the law enforcement realm, but when you're talking about medical calls, you're talking about patient history and making sure that information is not being publicly shared. We're struggling, I think, to some degree with the amount of scams that are going on and where are the bad guys getting the information. Is this a source where they're getting that information? I mean, I don't know. But these are some speculations that I can make on why the FBI may have made that decision ultimately. But they're the ones that write the policy. And because of some of the resources that our center utilizes to provide our first responders with pertinent information when they're on their calls, in order for us to maintain access to this information, we had to comply with their standards. And so what was the driving factor at the federal level? Ultimately, I don't know that exact answer.
Well, I know that, there are certain investigative information that possibly could go out over channels, but what other private information do you feel now that is being protected through this encryption? From
a law enforcement stance, how we do some operational tactics and stuff is we don't have to be concerned as much as how are we communicating our tactics, how our officers are communicating back and forth, and unfortunately there are bad guys, if you will, that are using scanners to their advantage. And, now we're not going to have to worry about that. Are they in a business, burglarizing a business, but yet they're listening to our radios to know, are we coming to that or not? I'll never be able to give you actual statistics of how often that is happening. But I suppose in the sense it's like the internet. You have bad actors that are using a great resource improperly. And unfortunately, few bad actors are what kind of ruin it for some of the, a lot of the other valid people. And so that's just some of my initial thoughts of how that process.
Well, I know that you talked about the Weather Channel. Are there other efforts that, the county and other organizations are doing to kind of keep the community informed when there's emergencies? If there's an incident, we need to stay out of an area, or there's a fire and people need to be evacuated? We're
looking at some new tools. I'm looking at a tool for next year potentially to bring on that will allow us to easily communicate to our public, whether it be based off a geographical region, whether it be based off a community, a block, or whatever that case may be, that we can be able to push out in a single text message from our perspective that goes to a system, and then it relays that out through the ability to whether it be a Facebook post or a Twitter post, or I guess it's X now, or doing phone calls to those areas. And so we're looking at some resources to try and improve that communication on those crises, and to ensure that we are getting those notices out to the public when they need them.